Well, welcome back to another day of Bible study. So glad that you are here with us as we are journeying through the book of Ephesians and focusing specifically on the topic of unity. So grateful that you have been with us throughout this entire study, if you have been. But if not, that's absolutely okay. You can pick up the readings right here at go.christtable.today/unity. That's going to tell you the rest of the reading plan on that real easy to find PDF. And we'd love to have you join us every day from here on out. You don't have to start back at the very beginning. Don't worry about that. Just start where we are right now and keep going. In fact, we have now finally gotten to what I would call at least the good part of the book of Ephesians. Now, I know that sounds a little bad. It's not as though the previous portions were bad, but the first part of the book of Ephesians is really kind of deep in the theology. And for some of us, that can be a little laborious to work through. But now we're into the really practical side of the book of Ephesians, and it gets really intentional and really practical and really applicational. And so I find that pretty interesting. Well, Christ Table is a ministry that we would love for you to be a part of. If you don't know more about us, you can go to our website, www.christtable.today, and find out more about us. We're a hybrid ministry. We're online as well as occasionally in person. In fact, this past weekend, I had the opportunity to spend it in Cleveland, Ohio, with people from all over the area, from Columbus, from all over the northeastern Ohio region. It was really an incredible time. And we've got several of those in-person gatherings coming up, and we'd love to have you be a part of them. And if you find this ministry is helpful to you, I'd love for you to sign up to donate regularly to what we're doing here. And in return for that, we send you a lot of spiritual resources through the mail regularly every couple of months to help your spiritual journey. One of the things that we sent last time, among many, to our regular donors was a copy of this book by Leonard Sweet, From Tablet to Table. And if you would like to join us in our book study of reading through this Wednesday nights, 9 p.m. Eastern, we get online at go.christtable.today/discuss and talk through a chapter in this book. This week it's chapter 4. If you didn't get one through the mail, that's okay. Just download this book on your e-reader, From Tablet to Table by Leonard Sweet. And Leonard's actually going to be with us on a live Zoom call on September 15th. And I would love to have you be a part of that. And you can be a part of that either by joining us on our book study or by signing up for our email list right there at www.christtable.today. Well, without any further delay, today we're in Ephesians chapter 4, verses 26 through 34 verses. And so let's dig in. One of my favorite parts of the Bible, especially in relation to Jesus, might be surprising to you because in that location of the story of Jesus, Jesus shows an emotion that oftentimes is not seen as being holy. Now, the part of the story of Jesus that I'm talking about is the part of the story where Jesus drives out the money changers from the temple. And I went online looking for some pictures of this, and in all of the paintings and renderings that I saw of it, Jesus was a little low-key in how they portrayed Jesus. But I think that it is clear that whenever Jesus took a whip to the money changers and turned over their tables, this was something that he was highly emotional about. And I'm going to use the word anger. In fact, the Bible tells us that the whip that Jesus used, he actually set and made himself. And so this was not a flare or a burst of emotion from Jesus out of nowhere. This was, for lack of a better word, premeditated. Now, I know that the podcast listeners will not see this photo, so you may have to hop over to Christ Table and check out the Facebook of this so you can see the video. But I love this picture of Jesus with this look on his face that is somewhere between confusion and frustration and anger. And I think that this is an emotion of Jesus that we we don't perhaps many times like to think much about. We don't love the idea of anger. In fact, many of us, men especially, if you grew up in the church, were taught that anger was an emotion that was not appropriate for a Christian. And so I know that many times we can move into this toxic masculinity that encourages anger and encourages us to live in the side of our emotions that are strong and that are bullyish. But I think that we can still be who God made us to be. We can be powerful as men and women, and that we can even express anger and do so in a way that does not cross the line. Now, okay, Pastor Kevin, you're gonna have to back this up, right? You can't just go against the church teaching that I was taught in Sunday school, saying that you can't be angry because being angry is a sin. That's a bridge too far. Well, Paul actually addresses that today in where we are in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 26. When he says this about anger: don't sin by letting anger control you, and don't let the sun go down while you are still angry, for anger gives a foothold to the devil. Okay, so first I want to start there at the end. For anger gives a foothold to the devil. Paul doesn't say there that anger is the devil's work. Paul says, be careful with anger, because what can happen there is that anger could give a foothold to something that is much more dangerous, especially for those who have a propensity for it. At our in-person gathering yesterday, we had wine there, and we had grape juice and other things to drink for people who wanted to receive communion. And somebody said to me, bold move, Pastor Kevin, having wine there. And I thought about it, and I thought, yeah, I guess for some people it was kind of a bold move. And a lot of people didn't partake of it. And the reason why a lot of people don't partake in wine is because they know that they have a propensity for crossing the line with it. And so a small drink could lead for some people to a real problem. And so they're teetotalers, and that's okay. And I think for anger, it can be that as well. For some people, anger is a gateway drug, a small bit of anger or a flash of hostility or allowing yourself to act out of that side of yourself can be a gateway drug into a real treacherous path that goes way off the deep end. But anger may give the devil a foothold for some people, but is not necessarily wrong. Well, first, Jesus showed anger, righteous anger and controlled anger, but Jesus showed anger. Throughout the Old Testament especially, we see God in moments expressing anger, which I think if God expresses anger, it's also not necessarily wrong that we would express anger rightly placed as well. Back to our verse. Paul says, don't sin by letting anger control you. He doesn't say, don't sin by being angry. No, he says, don't sin by letting anger control you, which means that a fair amount of anger in the right place, directed in the right way, can be okay. Then he further says right there in the middle of the verse, don't let the sun go down while you're still angry. So what we have here in this verse from Paul is really two verses that reflect something that we find in Psalm 4:4. Be angry, but don't sin, Psalm 4:4 says. It doesn't say that anger is a sin. It just says, be angry. It's okay in moments to be angry, but don't sin. And so Paul gives us some boundaries for what it looks like in his mind for anger to cross the line into sin. So anger is not a sin, but two things. A lack of control is a sin. So if we get to the point of our anger being so toxic masculinity or toxic femininity, where that anger goes too far, where we're no longer in control, Paul says that's sin. But he also says, when he says, don't let the sun go down on your anger, that enduring anger is a sin. Now, I think it might be too much to say if you go to bed angry, it's a sin. I don't think that that's what Paul is necessarily saying here, is that, before sundown, your anger's got to be past. But I think what he's doing is he's essentially expressing a metaphor. The language that he's using here in regard to anger is essentially saying to us, you need to make sure that your anger is short-lived, because enduring anger is pointing to some deeper brokenness or sin within you. I think, though, it may be a good thing to say that our anger should be reconciled or diffused before we go to bed. For those of us who are married, I doubly encourage that to be the case. Do everything you can. Stay up as long as you need to reconcile those things. That's always been something that Sally has strongly encouraged and let out in our family on. I'm kind of a stuffer, and so I'm just willing to bury things, but Sally isn't. And I think in that way, she expresses a very righteous and holier than myself center, because she, 2 a.m., wakes me up. We're going to walk through this. And it's been a powerful model for me, and hopefully one that you will live out as well in your relationships. Verse 28, Paul now moves from anger to stealing. If you are a thief, stop it. Kind of slaps you on the hand there. Quit stealing. Instead, use your hands for good, hard work, and then give generously to others in need. If we're giving generously, it's going to be very hard for us to thieve from other people. Why? Because those things are mutually exclusive. Thieving or stealing is born out of a heart that is self-focused and is not willing to self-sacrifice. It is selfish, not selfless. And so if we're giving generously to others in need, that's the opposite of selfish. That's selfless. And so I think in a lot of ways, being a person who gives generally is an antidote for a heart attitude of selfishness, of self-focusedness. And Paul says, stop that. Use your hands for good, hard work. Use your hands to bear things yourself rather than taking them or stealing them from other people. Thievery is in many ways the definition of the American capitalistic system. Business is about get what you can, however you can, and as much as you can, in any way that you can. The Bible speaks against that kind of lack of moral and ethical code. And as followers of the way of Jesus Christ, we need to be modeling that as well. Model generosity. Verse 28. Don't use foul or abusive language. Let everything that you say be good and helpful, so that your words will be an encouragement to those who hear. And I think, that's actually verse 29, even though it says verse 28 on the slide there. Don't use foul or abusive language, but let everything you say be good and helpful, so that your words will be an encouragement to those who hear them. Without belaboring the point, what Paul is saying here is, when he says foul or abusive language, he means rotten language, words that cause decay, that cause destruction in the minds and the hearts and the lives of other people. Don't tear people down. Don't destroy them with your words. That's what happens when something is rotten. The decay infects the things around it and then destroys the good things around it. That's what foul and abusive language does. And he's not talking about 4-letter words, the F word, the D word, GD, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is more of a mindset of any words that are used to be destructive, put downs, discouragement, harsh language and tone when unnecessary, anything that is foul or abusive or that destroys. And then at the end there, this words will be an encouragement to those who hear. And what he actually says there quite literally is that it gives grace to those who hear it. And so when we avoid speaking in rotten ways, we actually end up giving grace to all who hear or read what we're saying and what we're writing. Now, we can be strong in our words. We can be bold in our words. We can be direct and authentic in our words, but we can't always do that in ways that are kind and that give grace and that don't cause destruction, but that hopefully, even in challenging others, build them up. Sometimes we talk about communion, the bread and the cup, as being a means of grace, and that it gives grace to anyone who receives that meal. Paul says, I'm going to add something to that. It's not just the bread of communion. It's not just the cup of communion, but it's also the words that you use every single day that can be a means of grace for other people. And then verse 30, he essentially sums up what he's already said. Don't bring sorrow to God's Holy Spirit by the way you live. We started this in our last study when he talked about lying. And so whether it's lying or whether it's anger or whether it's thieving or whether it's the words that we use, any of those things can bring sorrow to God's Spirit by the way we live. And maybe what we need to do if we find ourselves having a propensity to live in those ways is to remember, finishing out verse 30 here, that he has identified you as his own. You're no longer yours. Your body, your mouth, your hands, your mind, all of those things are no longer essentially yours. They are God's, and they are his tools to use for the redemption of the world. So don't forget that. God needs you. Allow yourself to be used. We all have rough edges, whether it's lying, anger, stealing, or using our mouths in the wrong ways. We all have some rough edges here or there. Work on it. And remember how important it is to live well. It's about redemption, not just yours, but the redemption of the world. And God needs to use you. He wants to use you and me in order to make that happen. Well, it's been good to be here with you this morning. I want to encourage you, if you've not already done so, check us out over at christtable.today and sign up for the email list. That way you will be aware of everything that's going on. As this ministry grows and continues to meet needs, we would love to have you on board. But until tomorrow, happy reading.